But I don't want to just, only talk about guitar. You asked me about Weather Report,
Yeah.
and you could see that I mean, obviously those guys did come from jazz, from bebop. Wayne was doing bebop records long before Weather Report. Joe was playing with Cannonball Adderley and making solo albums. Joe used to sound like Bud Powell. I mean, have you ever heard a Joe Zawinul solo album? Dude, it sounds just like Bud Powell. That way you could tell that was his influence. So here's Joe Zawinul in a suit and tie playing super traditional bebop and doing it really well.
Makes sense.
Not with tons of chops, not like an Oscar Peterson, but just a very tasteful, very, very selective with his notes, really quality bebop pianist. Then you could see the transition toward Weather Report start happening with Cannonball, because he switched from playing in that band. He switched from playing acoustic piano to Fender Rhodes. Whole other thing. He basically went electric in that band, and he continued to go electric, as the technology started happening. He started to dabble with synthesizers, and by dabble, that's pretty understated. I mean,
his stage rig there for a while was pretty intense.
Yeah, he came up with, he wasn't one of those guys who just bought synthesizers and used the factory presets. He was a guy who really, really got into programming and really making some sounds that were his, very warm sounding analog synthesizer sounds, as opposed to many jazz keyboard players who just buy synths and use the factory programs. And it's, and that can sound good too, unless you're playing like a Yamaha DX7 or something like that, which is one of the worst synthesizers ever made. And then it's going to sound horrible. So, but whatever, that's what some jazz guys did. I played with one of them. Let's not mention names, but yeah, I mean, every night you just go, is he really using those sounds? Like, are you kidding me? Like, oh my God, it was like nails on a chalkboard. So Joe was one of those cats, as was Lyle Mays and Scott Kinsey, who really got into synthesizers and made them sound really good. They weren't just factory program guys.
Right.
So Joe had that thing going for him, but he also was really into R&B, and you can hear it in Weather Report. He was hanging around with black musicians, and anytime you're hanging around with black musicians, those black musicians are not going to they're not just usually jazz snobs. They're into they're into what's going on. They're into Sly Stone. They're into lots of different stuff. Right. So Joe loved R&B. He loved it. And that's where a big influence came, into Weather Report was, I mean, he used to talk all the time about, oh my God, who was his favorite? Marvin Gaye. He loved Marvin Gaye. So he wanted to sing like Marvin Gaye. He wanted his instruments to be like Marvin Gaye, to have that much soul. Right. And that's where he was coming from. Right. From that really strong R&B influence. And I think that was a big, and part of that influence is also in the songwriting. So you can hear it in Joe's songs that he was there. They weren't just heads and then you blow and then you play the head.
Right.
They were more like really melodic pop type tunes. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the voicing of the Rhodes, the way that he would sustain his chords was very R&B, know?
So it was super R&B. And so that was a big influence on Weather Report. I don't see much of a rock influence in Weather Report, because obviously no guitar. It's hard to have a rock band without a guitar player. But it was more of a funk R&B thing that hit them, and they did it well. And since they didn't have a guitar player, they didn't, like Wayne didn't really have to come into playing fusion or funk with any kind of a different tone that he already had. It was already great for jazz, and it's already great for Weather Report. However, Jocko comes along with this completely different bass tone that sort of was really innovative.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped characterize that band as a fusion band. But I have to say that even before, Alphonso Johnson was an amazing bass player who was Tailspin is one of my favorite records. And also I love the post Jocko albums just as much, you know, that Victor Bailey played on. There's amazing music in those albums. So that's my weather report.
How about let me just while we're there, what about like all of the percussion that was going on in those recordings? That was
well, that was just Joe's thing. I mean, if you heard Joe's composition sequences like I did, there was already percussion in all the drum patches. Like, you know, Joe, like everybody else that uses MIDI or uses computers to write music, his compositional sequences always had tons of percussion. So he was obviously said, well, in order to realize my vision of what this music sounds like, I got to hire a percussionist.
Right.
Simple as that.
Let's move. If you don't mind, let's move to another guitar player you had mentioned, because he's my favorite, or one of my favorites, is Jeff Beck.
Yeah.
Now, you know, obviously, you know, but people will talk about Wired and Blow by Blow, you know, for months. You know, they just keep going on it. Obviously, you know, came from a rock place, but he's somebody that's like at the top of the list, you know, of fusion when people talk about Blow by Blow and Wired specifically.
Sure. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about Jeff Beck?
Well, I love Jeff Beck, and a lot of people can hear his influence in my playing with the vibrato bar. It's not just Jeff Beck. You know, sometimes I get a little pissed off because as soon as I touch the bar, oh, well, he sounds like Jeff Beck. You know, Jeff Beck didn't invent the vibrato bar. You know, I was listening to Richie Blackmore and the vibrato bar way before I ever heard Jeff Beck. You know? And another thing is, like, you know, you can trace influences in everybody's playing, and and some people don't realize that Jeff Beck, one of Jeff Beck's big influences was Les Paul. So, in fact, I don't know disrespect to Jeff,
right?
Because everybody has influences. I have mine. Everybody has their influences. But I walked into a music store when I was a kid, and I thought the new Jeff Beck album had just come out, and they were playing Les Paul. And I was like, oh, the new Beck album is out. And it was Les Paul. And I was going, oh, so this is where Jeff Beck got a lot of his stuff from.
Yeah.
You know, so when I played at the Iridium, must have been 10 years ago, I got to play with Les Paul's band after he had already passed. His band kept the tribute thing going, and they had guests, and I got to be a guest.
Oh, cool.
And it was a real honor to do that. But because I'm a big fan of Les Paul and Jeff Beck. But yeah, let's talk about Jeff Beck. The one thing that was interesting about Jeff is that he never really got so far into jazz that he was playing over chord changes.
Right.
You know, that fusion was a fusion of rock and jazz, more from the fact that it was instrumental rock.
Right.
You know, not so much of a jazz influence, because there were no changes, that people weren't playing over changes on those albums, Blow by Blow and Wired. They're still great records, but to be honest, my favorite Jeff records were actually before those, the Orange album, and the that's probably my favorite one, the one with Going Down on it. And I love that record. But I also really liked Blow by Blow and Wired, and I liked some of the recent stuff that he's done too.
Emotion and Commotion is my favorite record.
Yeah, that's a great one too. Yeah, he's always doing good stuff. He's just such a fantastic player, fantastic melodic guitar player, and that's what I love about Beck, is that he's one of those guys like Toots Thielmans or Wayne Shorter, that he's more about the phrases than the chops.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that just all the respect for that. You know, that's what I love too.
So that it's interesting that you pointed out that those records are you know, they're not playing over changes. It's not There Will Never Be Another You, or All the Things You Are, or, you know, any of those tunes that, you know, any of the standard ballads. It's a Vamp thing. It's kind of like what Miles was doing. You know, a lot of those Miles records with all the guitar players, they were Vamp records,
Right.
And that's two different kinds of jazz, if you will. I mean, I'm not, I'm not going to pretend to be a musicologist here, because I'm not. But one is blowing over changes is one set of skills, and then blowing over a vamp and making it interesting is another skill. It's a whole.
I totally agree. I practice equally on both.
Yeah. They're two different things, and one does not take second place to another, because like I've seen guys who are very good at playing over changes, and you give them a vamp to play on and they run out of creativity in a few bars
real fast.
Yeah, and they
because that's not their thing.
They don't know where to go next, or wait a minute, where am I going? And obviously I've seen guys that can do both really, really well, but people should never put down the vamp player, because you run out of that tackles the mind, ideas. You got to keep the ideas.
My opinion is and I'm just speaking for me, playing over vamps is harder.
Because I agree with you.
It requires a little bit more creativity. It's really difficult because, like, especially if you're playing over multiple vamps in a night, you got to come up with some sonic things that are a little interesting, that because it's very hard for one solo to sound like another. So I found that if I change sounds, it inspires me to play different things than I would if I played with a regular guitar sound. If I kick on a different pedal and give me a completely different vibe, I play a different way. And that's helpful if you have to play like multiple vamps in a night. But also just, you have to be a lot more rhythmically creative since there's no chords, and you have to interact a lot more, because without interaction with the other band members, vamps can get stale really fast and go nowhere.
And those gigs went on for like 2.5 hours.
Yeah. Changes kind of play themselves in a way. If you're playing the changes and you're playing all the right notes, of course it's better if you're a rhythmic and you have nice motifs in your solo, of course.
Yeah.
But you can get away without them a lot easier than you can playing on a vamp, because on a vamp, if you don't have motifs going and you don't have rhythmic phrases that develop and also communicate with the other band members, that can get stale really quick and be boring. Now, and then the audience just feels like it's going on forever, and people fall.
Some of the people are going to see this, and they're not going to know what a vamp is.
It's just a groove over one chord.
A groove over one chord. That's it.
While you're improvising. Like Miles did it in Bitches Brew, probably one of the first to put out a record like that. That just a one key, like a, what do you call them things? I forget. There's an Indian word for it.
It's raga?
Is that the word? I don't know.
Raga, R-A-G-A. I don't know. We'll have to call John McLaughlin and ask him.
I would call it a drone. It's a drone of like one chord that just never.
oh God, yeah. Well, to some people, drone is a 4-letter word. You know that, right?
Yeah, right. But the whole idea is, to try to make that sound like you're playing inside over changes that aren't there. So you are playing other harmonies, and you're taking it. Some people would call it taking it out. I don't really see it as taking it out. I just see it as being creative and playing. I don't think anybody expects you to, if you're having a key, a vamp that's just in the key of E, I don't think someone expects you to just stick to the key of E through the whole thing.
So what years was this that you were playing with the R&B band?
Oh, this is probably 73 through 76.
76. And then 77. When were you playing the Purple Ibanez? What years was that?
That was during the Tribal Tech years. I'd say, from 85 to, well, actually I didn't have the 2000 then, but from the very beginning of Tribal Tech, I was playing a Strat with a humbucker in it.
Right.
Because that was kind of the style of the day. I mean, it started kind of Eddie Van Halen influenced that. And everybody wanted a Strat in their humbucker. So I jumped on that bandwagon, and it was a cool sound. Holdsworth did it.
Mm-hmm.
So for the whole time in Tribal Tech, I was playing a Stratocaster with a humbucking pickup. So it sounds kind of like it doesn't sound like a vintage Strat anymore. It sounds kind of like a Gibson Fender hybrid type of tone. And still have a guitar with a Strat with a humbucker in it. I don't use it much, but because to me, it's kind of a dated sound, not overall, but for me, it's kind of a dated sound. I kind of like the vintage sound, not that that's not dated too. But
the irony of the statement.
Right, the irony. Right. Yeah, I think I want to be more modern and go back to the 50s.
That's very dated.
Yeah, it's really dated going back to the vintage 80s.
Sound.
Yeah, I want to be dated back to the 50s, not the
80s. Oh God, that's beautiful. Well, I've got a Sir Strat over there with a couple humbuckers in it. They got them in both positions, and
it's a great tone. I mean, that's what Mike Landau's using now. He's using a Strat with a humbucking bridge pickup, and it sounds great. It's a thing. I just kind of got used to single coils, and I love the sound of them, and I think they have a little bit more transparency, and I think they're also a little bit more versatile.
They're more dynamic for sure. More
dynamic, less compressed, more better for blues, I think.
You got the award for was it Downbeat or Billboard #1 jazz guitar player? Was in '91, I think it was.
Yeah, and I think it was in '91. And I also won 2019 Jazz Times Readers Poll #1 jazz guitars, and also best ensemble. But you know what was really amazing to me? I'm not trying to brag because I'm
it's not a brag. You just
I saw my list. There was a composer category, and I was number 4. And but Wayne Shorter was #1, and I was like, oh my God, I'm on a list with Wayne Shorter. just to be on the same list with that guy was like, oh my God. I mean, that's the most fantastic thing I've ever seen. I was pretty proud of it. And I know those polls. I mean, I don't know, I'm nowhere in that guy's league, but it was just cool to see my name up there with his.
Oh, hell yeah. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, but
when you came to Atlanta, about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I mean, your set was about 80% Weather Report.
Yeah, just because I knew those guys in the band. They knew those tunes.
They knew those tunes, and
we know those Wayne Shorter tunes in the real book, and
they'd be able to play the tunes.
I've always been a fan of his writing, and this is just personal taste, and it has nothing to do with anything. It's just personal taste, but I've never really been a fan of standards in general. The 2-5-1 thing, it doesn't do that much for me. Like songs that have a lot of 2-5-1s in them, it's just not my thing. It doesn't float my boat like those amazing Wayne Shorter tunes like Anna Maria, or I can just name so many of his tunes in the real book that I would much rather play than the traditional.
Well, I will bet you that Wayne could play his ass off on 2-5-1s.
Oh, of course.
And decided he wanted to go somewhere else.
Well, I think
it's kind of like Miles. Miles. Yeah. Miles played bop, post bop, pre bop. Every bop you can think of. But then he really got into the whole vamp thing, and
I can tell you from experience that when I was in Joe's band, still trying to learn how to be a better jazz musician, as I always will, but when I would try to play bebop stuff, Joe just didn't want to hear it. In fact, I was overdubbing on a song, Little Rudy Tootie, that was on the second album I did with Joe. Right. And he said, yeah, go ahead and play a solo on this tune. I want to hear what you come up with. And he just split. Gave me like a half an hour. And I played this solo on Little Rudy Tootie. I punched in and fixed some stuff. And I was really happy with it because it really made all the changes. And it sounded bebop because that's what the song is, right?
Right.
He hated it. He walked in and he said, if I wanted Charlie Christian, I would have dug him up and hired him. Like, okay. Joe didn't want to hear it. He just didn't want to hear anything that sounded like bebop. So he said, just play you.
Yeah.
Don't. So I just did my thing, and I I played a solo and it was the first take and it was mostly just bluesy. Right. And he said, that's it. That's the one. Right. I was like, after working for like a half an hour to get a really good one, he just wanted me to just wing it and play some pentatonic blues. And he was really
the thing you have to listen to, I think anyway. And, you know, the guys that play bebop really, really well, you don't notice that they're playing through the changes.
They're thinking more about the ideas.
The ideas, and you don't notice it. It's the guys that are pretty good at it, because it takes a lot of schooling, a lot of work, and a lot of, you know, to get where you can play fluidly through the changes. Notice I didn't use the word musically through the changes. Mm-hmm. You know, if you listen to Wes, you know, Wes played through changes, but not like anybody else I've ever heard. You know, that's just me talking.
There's a thing, the top level of playing through changes is when you're able to play motivically. In other words, you're telling a story. Right. And you're the boss of the story, not the chord changes. Right. So a lot of times when I hear my students play jazz, they play all the correct notes through the changes, but they're not telling a story. It sounds like noodling.
It doesn't sound like music.
Every note is correct.
Technically, it's great.
Sort of like reading a book that doesn't have any paragraphs, periods, question marks. It's just correct text. Right. And it's all correct, but it's hard to tell where one idea stops and another idea begins. Yeah. So the good players are telling a story and they're playing motifs and ideas that go through the chord changes. They're not just playing individually on every chord. So that's how I tell the difference between the real pro players and the guys who are not that good at it. Yeah, I'm not always able to do it myself. On a good night, I can, but there's nights where I just can't think of anything to play, and I end up just riffing through the changes. And when I hear it, I go, well, nice try, but you didn't really do it. And then there are some nights where I really feel like I've got more confidence, and I think that something is really worth repeating, and I'm able to tell a good story. And, you know, those are my good nights. So
which kind of goes back to something that you put in one of your videos of me and years ago, and that was moving around the pentatonic shape.
Yeah, that's kind of like an idea. You take one idea, then you try that same idea with a different color. Right. Difference over chord changes is that you would be keeping that same idea, but using a different scale over the next chord. Or, you know what I have my students do? I have them play songs like Mary Had a Little Lamb or Happy Birthday or Stella by Starlight. They have to play the melody of the song, but they have to play it over whatever set of chord changes that they're playing, because then that means they have to commit to playing that melody, right? But they have to change the notes of that melody to fit the changes.
Oh, that's that commitment. Guy. You're that's that guy.
Yeah, but that's commitment.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah, that's commitment, because you have to commit to that melody. And whatever comes along harmonically, you have to adapt your melody to that harmony that comes along. So you start with very simple things like Mary Had a Little Lamb, Happy Birthday, Yesterday, simple tunes, but you can't stick with the melody. You have to stick with the melody structure wise, like as far as when the melody goes up, you go up rhythmically and structurally, or I'm thinking of a better word for structure. Shape, right? You know, the shape of the melody and the rhythm of the melody has to stay, but the notes are going to change to fit the chords. So, and it's challenging. It's more challenging than people think, because they try to do it and they go, God, this is hard. You know,